the total forces acting on the capsule. And it's really hard to predict, actually, what those pressures are. So with some truth on the backside, that can really help us nail down the total behavior of the capsule as it's flying at those low speeds.
It seems like we're getting an awful lot of good data on the things that are happening during EDL and Mars, especially for Medley and Medley 2. Are we able to, in the future, maybe translate what you're doing here to potential different atmospheres or different EDL circumstances?
Absolutely. So Medley 1 definitely demonstrated, and it was the reason I think we have Medley 2, was it became the model of how you put an instrument package on a heat shield, how to work with the project to do it, so that they're not scared about, putting holes in their pristine heat shield that's designed to keep their rover on the ground. We have a process now to do that. So you'll see missions going to Venus or Jupiter, Titan, those kinds of things. They'll all have instrumentation during entry, and NASA has the confidence to require that because we did so well with Medley 1 and hopefully again with Medley 2.
Mark did a really nice job discussing Medley 2, but I have to ask the question, in all my years at NASA, talking to subject matter experts from all 10 centers, what is a reconstruction lead?
Reconstruction is really important after a flight to understand exactly how and where the vehicle flew.
Oh, okay.
And without the proper data, it's really hard. You have to make some assumptions.
Okay.
So, for instance, before Medley, when we didn't have an independent pressure measurement, we had to assume something about the aerodynamics of the vehicle in order to figure out how it flew.
Okay.
Now with that independent pressure measurement, we can nail it and we don't have to make any assumptions. So reconstruction lead is really key to understanding how we did.
See, you learn something new every day. I had no clue.
Yeah, he comes back up with that flight plan that they had and where the data is along those flight plans. It's very important.
Now, speaking of that flight plan, with Medley 2, can you take the data from Medley 1 and kind of show what the flight plan is going to be for Mars 2020, or is that a completely different flight plan?
It's a lot the same because it's the same shape, size, vehicle. The mass will probably be a little different. They're using the same entry, descent, and landing system, but the atmosphere obviously will be a little bit different. The entry velocity will be a little bit different because of the different year.
Right.
But largely, we're going to use all of our MSL simulations as the basis for where we start on 2020.
Now, I know, Steve, with game changing, you take technologies and you take them from a technology readiness level. We always talked about that 1 through that 9 scale.
Yeah.
And you're in that middle range.
Middle range, about 3 to 5 or 6.
Right. So, but with Medley, since you have proven you have a flight underneath you, and then you're working on Medley 2, is that still considered, technology at that level?
Yeah,
it's still not space ready.
Yeah, and it was like what Michelle was telling you was we learned so much through Medley 1 that we want to put different kinds of transducers to get the lower pressure range. We want to understand the back shell pressures and radiation rates. So we learned so much, so it's not really just a repeat of Medley 1.
Yeah, we have totally new sensors. Knowing what we know from Medley 1, we've moved a lot of our sensors, so we have kind of the same number of channels of data, but we've distributed them differently on the forebody and then moved some to the back of the vehicle.
Well, speaking of a new mission, we also have now, instead of Medley 2, we also have HIAD 2.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Which is a hypersonic aerodynamic inflatable decelerator.
Inflatable aerodynamic, yes.
We did it again. It's a hypersonic inflatable aerodynamic decelerator?
Yes.
Bravo.
Very cool.
Bravo.
All right, so that's a completely different type of EDL system from Medley 2.
It is.
And Franklin had a chance to sit down with the project manager, Joe Del Corso.
Yes.
And we're going to learn more about HIAD 2, so let's check that out.
So Joe, we're talking about HIAD 2. Tell me what has changed since HIAD 1.
So we've had a number of changes. The first one was we upgraded our thermal protection system. In HIAD 1, we used a Generation 1 thermal protection system, which was somewhat capable. It's low temperature capable, basically something on the order of 1,000 to 1,100 degrees Celsius on the surface. For HIAD 2, what we've looked at is much higher temperature capable materials, much more flexible and lighter weight. So now we're using custom built silicon carbide materials as an outer fabric. We're using COTS materials and some custom materials for our insulator systems. And then on the backside for the gas barrier, you have woven fabric systems with PTFE film wrapped around it. Our inflatable structure is also being upgraded. And then the other thing that we're doing is we are working on scalability. We're focusing on trying to get to a 12-meter scale. In order to do that, we've got to upgrade a lot of our equipment. We've got to work on something as simple as just picking up one of the gore seams. It takes a lot of development, a lot of careful coordination. So what we're focused on is not just upgrading our materials, but also upgrading our handling techniques, our manufacturing techniques.
Tell me about the HIAD timeline from the time it was conceived to where we are right now with HIAD 2.
So HIAD has been in development, previously it wasn't known as HIAD, but it's been in development now for almost a decade, and we still have probably another 4 years worth of work to do to get us to human access to Mars. We started out in 2006 doing material testing, and really all we were doing is we were doing low-level, trying to learn how to test fabric systems so that we could simulate an atmospheric entry condition. We were learning how to learn in the early phases. We had ERVI-1 happen. Unfortunately, there was a launch vehicle anomaly, so we lost that. But what it did do is enabled us to put in place ERVI-2 flight tests. People had enough confidence in what we were doing that they allowed us to build a build-to-print. That went up on a sounding rocket, launched out of Wallops, and it was an incredibly successful proof of concept. We had an inflatable structure, but no real TPS at the time, thermal protection system. Following the success of ERVI-2, we started up what we currently know as HIAD, which is the Hypersonic Inflatable Aerodynamic Decelerator project. During that project, we were doing all the lab scale development, small scale, little samples. We had learned how to do the initial testing. Now we were taking it through a maturation process, getting it ready for flight again. The third flight that we flew out of Wallops again is called ERVI-3. That was a much higher heating condition, and it was the first chance for us to actually test a thermal protection system with our inflatable structure. After the success of ERVI-3 and the closure of the initial HIAD, we attempted to fly an orbital entry flight test called THOR, the Terrestrial HIAD Orbital Reentry Flight Test. Unfortunately, due to the ORB-3 failure, we had to cancel THOR and we went back to a ground development effort. But unlike the first two ground development efforts, the third one wasn't focused on learning how to test or testing materials or developing materials. It's focused on scaling. So we did small scale in the early development phases, and now we're scaling to something more applicable for human access to Mars.
Now, the cool thing I understand about HIAD 2, that you guys have a partnership with ULA.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
So about a year ago, ULA announced that they wanted to use HIAD technology to recover their boosters as part of their new business model,
Right.
Affordability. And so we've been working on a flight demonstration with them over the last year and a half.
Yeah, and that would be at the 6-meter scale, which is about halfway to what ULA would need for their full booster recovery, 12 meters that Joe talked about on the video. And it's also the right scale for us to do maybe a technology demonstration mission leading up to putting humans on Mars.
So the idea is that you're using this HIAD technology to recover the first stage of a ULA rocket. And so is that going to be recoverable, and is that going to sort of land in the ocean? Is it going to land on dry land? How is that going to work?
They actually want to snatch it out of midair with a helicopter and to minimize any refurbishment costs.
Wait a minute, so you're going to have this booster coming down with the HIAD deployable shell.
Yes.
And then the helicopter's going to come and just kind of grab it
mid-air retrieval. Yes, it'll come in. It'll have a catch hook, and the helicopter will come. It's a modified helicopter, obviously, But that's the plan.
Yeah, we've not air snatched anything of that mass yet,
Right.
so that's a little bit of technology development as well.
Wow, I seriously hope that you go back to your ESM folks and do some modeling of that snatching, because I
Reconstruction of the booster trajectory.
Reconstruction. So the reconstruction will be a part of that too.
Absolutely.
That's perfect. Well, we're looking forward to seeing that in action, because that will be something to see when that actually happens.
That would be awesome.
And also with HIAD, which is a win-win not only for ULA but for NASA. NASA gets a demonstration out of it, but then it kind of matures that technology to move on to an eventual test on Mars.
Yes.
Awesome. I tell you what, we've come to the close of just part one of EDL. I mean, we've covered a lot of technology today, and on the next show, we're going to be covering even more technologies.
Yeah, we should be talking about Adept and 3D Mat and heat.
And now, with regards to 3D mat and heat, that's more of the material side as opposed to the big system side, isn't it?
Right.
I'm looking forward to that, and so stay tuned. We're going to be talking more about EDL. You're watching NASA Edge.
So we are standing in the Quest airlock, which is divided into two parts. We have the equipment lock and we have the crew lock. This equipment lock has a hatch right here that closes, and the crew lock has another hatch. The EMU, or the Extravehicular Mobility Unit, is our spacesuit, and it's divided roughly into two parts. We have the hard upper torso, which is almost like a turtle shell. It's a hard fiberglass shell, and then we also have the lower torso assembly. These spacesuits are our own little spacecraft, and they have everything you need to keep you alive out in space for 7 to 8 hours, maybe even longer, depending on how hard you're working. The only thing that they do not have, and they have radios, it has oxygen, it has carbon dioxide scrubbing, it has temperature control, it has everything you need except for one thing, a restroom. And so when we get ready for our EVA, the first thing we put on in the morning is a diaper, and that's our first layer. Then over the diaper we put on a pair of long johns, and that's to keep our arms and legs from getting scraped up. It also provides a little bit of wicking in case you're getting really hot and sweaty. The next layer is our liquid cooling garment, and the LCVG has little tubes running through it which allow water to circulate inside the LCVG to provide cooling when we're outside working really hard. So we've got the diaper, we've got long johns, we got the LCVG, and then we're going to wear our spacesuit. 7 layers from the bladder on the inside, which maintains pressure, and that's a rubberized bladder, all the way out to the white layer on the outside. The crew member inside the spacesuit is also wearing this, what we call a Snoopy cap. It's a communications cap. We have a radio, so we can talk to not only to Houston, but we can talk to people on the space station and to each other. So we wear this communication cap inside the helmet. Also, another key component of the EMU, or a spacesuit, is the helmet. You can see the helmet has a gold visor, which protects us from the rays of the sun that we can bring down. It's pretty bright out there, and this gold visor helps reflect the rays of the sun so we can actually see and operate in daylight. At nighttime, we can raise this visor up, gives us a clearer view, and additionally we have helmet lights built into the helmet. On top of the helmet, we also have a television camera, so the ground is able to watch us while we work through these TV cameras. The work is really all done with hands, and so our gloves are really our most important piece of equipment in order for us to work outside. And one of the real challenges of a spacewalk is you have this heavy gloved hand, which is inflated, so it wants to stay like it's blown up like a balloon. But we walk by grabbing onto handrails and making our way along the ISS. So every time you move your hand, you're fighting against a balloon that wants to inflate. And then on top of that, all of our equipment is based on using your hands too. So after 6.5, 7 hours of kind of fighting against this glove, it's a really long day, and your hands are probably the thing that are most exhausted after 7 hours out on an EVA. Well, we're going out to work. You probably saw me move this mini workstation. The way we carry our tools is on a mini workstation, which is carried on the front. Every single tool we use is tethered to us. We do not want to accidentally create satellites. Our primary way of remaining attached to the ISS, if we're not using our hands, are these waist tethers. And you can see they just have a big hook. They go around a rail or anything else on the ISS and latch on, and it actually has a locking mechanism as well to hold us nice and tight. So we always want to have one of these attached if we're not holding on with our hands as well. The back of the EMU has our life support system. The life support system contains all the equipment we need, from a UHF radio down to the oxygen tanks that provide primary oxygen. One of the challenges inside this sealed environment, it's very easy to carry our own oxygen with us, but we generate a lot of carbon dioxide, particularly when we're out there working very hard. So to combat that, to deal with that, we have these canisters called Medox canisters, which are just silver oxide. They are carried in the backpack along with a very large battery, which provides all the electricity for us. I don't have a battery here to show you today because we're in the process of charging them. We're about a month out from doing a spacewalk, and we've already started getting ready for that. So this Medox canister is able to remove about 7 to 8 hours of carbon dioxide that a human can generate inside the spacesuit. EVAs have allowed us to build and maintain the ISS, repair mission-critical hardware, investigate malfunctions, install new hardware, and the view, unbelievable. See you next time.
Ten, 9, 8, ignition sequence start. Engines on. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All engines running. Launch commit.
When you think of NASA, you probably think of space exploration, which is a huge part of what NASA does. But what you might not know is that aeronautics, the science of flight, is also an important piece of NASA's directive. It's even in our name, National Aeronautics and Space Administration. In fact, NASA was conducting flight research long before we put a man on the moon. NASA has flown some of the world's most advanced research technologies, leading to innovations in safety, speed, and efficiency. We here at NASA's Armstrong Flight Research Center have been on the cutting edge of aeronautical development in pursuit of our goal to advance technology and science through flight. Our story began in the 1940s when the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, NASA's predecessor agency, teamed up with the U.S. Air Force to fly the X-1 rocket plane in pursuit of one question. Could an aircraft and its pilot fly faster than the speed of sound?
A B-29 will take the XS-1 aloft and launch her at an altitude of about 35,000 feet. The really big moment. Through the sound barrier. The first time ever in level flight.
They successfully answered that question in 1947. New X-planes soon followed, and throughout the 1950s, these aircraft made headlines with ever higher speed and altitude records. The fastest and most remarkable of all the rocket planes, the X-15, was flown from 1959 to 1968. There was simply nothing else like it. Pilots took it to speeds of over 4,500 miles per hour, and some flights reached altitudes so high that they passed briefly into space. Many of NASA's X-15 test pilots actually earned their astronaut wings here. One of the pilots who did not was a young man named Neil Armstrong. However, his experiences flying the X-15, as well as the Lunar Landing Research Vehicle, provided him the skills he needed on later missions, where he, of course, did end up earning his wings.
One small step for man.
Research aircraft like the X-15 provided valuable information about the human body in spaceflight and were critical in the design of future aircraft and spacecraft. The Armstrong Flight Research Center introduced the world to wingless experimental aircraft. Flown in the 1960s and 1970s, these vehicles made a great contribution to the future of spaceflight. In 1977, we applied knowledge gained from the flights of these lifting bodies when we conducted the approach and landing tests, a milestone in the development of the Space Shuttle program. The prototype orbiter Enterprise was used to verify the flying characteristics of the shuttles and to test the systems before they ever went into space. These risky flights, 5 in all, were a success, and the Space Shuttle program would go on to be one of NASA's most important achievements in space travel and exploration. During the life of the program, there were 59 successful shuttle landings here, including those of the Enterprise. Today, wingless lifting bodies are making a comeback as Sierra Nevada brings its Dream Chaser to flight status. Supporting the shuttle program was only one part of our work in the post-Apollo years. Have you ever heard the term fly-by-wire? It describes the use of electronics and computers to control an aircraft. Taking the place of mechanical or hydraulic systems, fly-by-wire technology was first tested on a modified F-8 aircraft in 1972. The flights were dangerous, but they revolutionized aviation. A fly-by-wire production system first appeared on the Air Force's F-16 and is now common on all new commercial airliners, most new business jets, and even in family automobiles as drive-by-wire systems. ABS brakes, cruise control, accelerators, even steer-by-wire are technologies derived from research done at NASA Armstrong, and all are now part of our daily lives. Another example of aeronautical innovation NASA conducted at Armstrong is winglets, which were tested and validated here in the 1970s and 1980s. By reducing aerodynamic drag, winglets improve aircraft fuel efficiency. They are now used on all types of aircraft. We also conducted tests in the mid-70s to find ways to reduce drag on long-haul trucks with aerodynamic fairings, the results of which have also been widely adopted. As far back as the 1960s, NASA Armstrong pioneered the use of a ground control station from which to fly unmanned aerial vehicles, known as UAVs. Becoming increasingly common today, these aircraft are used by the center to develop technology that allows them to see one another and automatically take evasive action to avoid collisions. Known as Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast, or ADS-B, this tracking technology is something that all aircraft operating in U.S. airspace must adopt by January 2020 in order to comply with FAA regulations. Between 2007 and 2009, one of our UAVs, known as Icana, flew over thick smoke and haze to record hotspots and the progression of wildfires in California. Data from the aircraft sensors was downlinked and overlaid on Google Earth maps, then transmitted in near real time to the Interagency Fire Center, where it was made available to fire incident commanders to assist them in allocating their firefighting resources. The effects were dramatic enhancements for the fire crews. Armstrong also operates 2 early model Global Hawks, another type of UAV. These aircraft can fly long distances, remain airborne for up to 32 hours, and can carry large payloads of instruments into areas, such as hurricanes, that are too dangerous for scientists to fly in. NASA has long been involved in Earth science research, and the Armstrong Flight Research Center operates a variety of aircraft to support this directive, including 2 ER-2s, a DC-8, and a C-20, as well as the large UAVs. These aircraft are equipped with instruments that researchers use to obtain measurements of environmental phenomena, such as the thickness of ice sheets, precipitation, and air quality. Measurements and readings are often combined with global satellite observations and ground sampling to better understand these environmental conditions. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Armstrong tested hybrid propulsion technology in the hopes of making aviation greener. Other NASA aeronautical research has improved fuel efficiency, lowered noise levels, and reduced harmful emissions. But much more can be done in these areas. That's why NASA implemented the environmentally responsible aviation